My name is Meira Blaustein. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Woodstock Film Festival. Really love being here at White Feather Farm. And today we have been running panels here, one after the other after the other. We had a panel with one of the panelists sitting here, Karen Allen. It's great. This is a special panel. This year we are honoring 4 amazing individuals for their various accomplishments. And one of the honorees is Ariana Bocco, she's receiving our Trailblazer Award. Ariana is the president of IFC Films. And as we discussed outside, she is the only non-male executive in our industry today, which is amazing. I mean, and she is amazing. She's been around for, she's truly an inspiration for so many of us. So, and to host a conversation with Ariana is Marianne Coltai-Levine. She is a marketing and publicity specialist and a person who every person in the industry would love to be able to work with. I've had the pleasure of working with her last year. And so to lead the conversation, I'd love to invite Marianne as well as Ariana Bocco come up here.
Thank you. So nice to see everybody. As Meira said, my name is Marianne Coltai-Levine, and it is a really important honor, actually, for me to be able to do this because Ariana and I, as we had discussed earlier, sort of started together. And we started many moons ago at a company called Fine Line Features, New Line Cinema. And in like the early days of indies, and I think that it was a very unusual time and there was a lot of enthusiasm and excitement. And what Ariana has done over these last 20, 25 years,
30.
is, I think, really had this amazing combination of intelligence and knowledge and maintained enthusiasm and optimism. And she has also, along the way, found the combination of not only understanding the business, but appreciating the art and not being afraid of innovation. And I think that's a rare combination. And so it is, an honor for me to be here to have this conversation and congratulate you on your award as well.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. It's been a little while since I've been to Woodstock, but I'm really happy to be back and honored to be in such an incredible company with the awards honorees tonight.
I think being at a festival is so important. And I think now that we're out of COVID and we're starting back at festivals and things like that, I think that curation and those platforms have become so valuable. But I want to start back with you. Like, you're from New Jersey.
Yes. Can't you tell?
And how you started your career. And sort of what I think is very interesting are the different sort of blocks of experience that brought you to IFC, where you've been since 2006.
Yeah.
So it's
years.
a long, and it's not that often that you also are in the same company. She's obviously risen through the ranks as she's the president. But the point being, like, she's been at a company that she's been able to develop and grow. So let's talk about the beginning and you getting to LA.
So, yes, I think after I graduated from college, I had always had a love of film. I didn't come at it from a film school perspective the way some other people that I know have come into the business, but I had a passion for it and a love for it, and I didn't really know, I think, what that meant to be honest. When, you know, you're 21 and you're graduating from college, you just have an excitement and a passion to go find a job and work and figure it out. And I think I had taken a trip when I was 8 years old to Los Angeles, and, you know, remember driving down Hollywood Boulevard just with eyes as big as saucers, like thinking, this is what I want to do, and not knowing what
What
any
that
of that meant or anything. You know, I suppose there was a little bit of a starstruck aspect to it, even though I'm not really a starstruck type of person. But so I think in the back of my head, it was always there. I had a liberal arts degree, and
Where'd you go to school?
I went to Sarah Lawrence
Oh, right, in Bronxville.
in Bronxville, and not too far from here. And I and I really was on a path actually to become a photojournalist. And I had been started to take a lot of photography and did a lot of journalism. And when I graduated from college, I actually got a job back where I lived at the Asbury Park Press as a stringer. And I thought, this, you know, this perhaps is one path to a career, and I really was interested in that. And then my roommate who lived in LA, my roommate from college who lived in LA, she said, I'm getting my apartment. Do you want to be my roommate? And I said, okay. And I just picked up and moved to LA. And I didn't have a job. I had nothing. And it was, you know, that only time in your life, really, when you have zero responsibility, that you can really do something like that. And I got a job, and then I got another job, and then I was really able to just start building on that. And I just was a sponge. And I worked at you know, my first job was at an agency. So I learned the agency world, and I learned how do projects get put together and how do projects get made. And then I realized, well, I don't want to be an agent because it was in the 90s, it was a very particular culture that I did not respond to. And then I thought, okay, I'll work for a producer. So I worked for Steve Tisch, who was a very prominent producer. It was right after Forrest Gump. And he was very well known. And I worked there for a year and was able to really learn how to find material and develop it. And then I got a phone call from a former client at ICM who was directing his first movie for the president of Fine Line at the time, Ruth Vitale, and she had just greenlit this movie called Don Juan DeMarco. And he called me up and he said, I need an assistant. And I thought, wow, I get to be an assistant to a director on a movie that's financed, and it stars Johnny Depp and Marlon Brando and Faye Dunaway. Like, how
What could
cool
go
is
wrong?
that? So I did that for a year, and then through that experience, which I could really spend the entire day talking about, I met everyone at Fine Line. And when that experience was over, I was offered a job as an assistant at Fine Line Features, and so that began my sort of life after having done different aspects of the ecosystem of Hollywood. I joined Fine Line, and I really felt like I had a home, and I stayed for 6 years. And it was really only because I really had nowhere left to grow at the company that I ended up moving to New York and working for Harvey Weinstein. So that sort of, you know, put me, you know, all of those experiences, this is like a very abbreviated run of my resume, but all of those experiences, you know, you are a sponge and you do learn things. And I was at Miramax for 3 years, and when they divorced Disney in 2004, I left, and I actually
Gersh, right?
I became an agent for a year and tried to learn how to put financing together, feature packaging, that's what they called it. And I didn't, after having been a buyer, working for a buyer for so long, almost 10 years, I realized I'm not cut out. I couldn't lie. I couldn't, you know, asking for finance. It was just very difficult for me to feel good about that in a job. So I was offered the head of production and acquisitions at IFC Films in 2006.
And Jonathan was there then?
Jonathan Searing was the president there, and I accepted the job. And I really haven't looked back. And I think the reason I've still been there 16 years later is because it was the first job that intersected with the right level of experience that I was at the time and the age that I was at, that I was able to use what I had learned and experienced and put it to practical use, where I was given independence and given freedom to identify and acquire films and build a library. And when I really understood the power of that, being able to build a library and to put yourself behind, supporting artists, but also creating a business, for me, it was the ultimate merger of art and commerce. And that empowered me really to keep going. And the reason I can keep going and I'm still there is because I love it. And, you have challenges and you have to work through what's happening in the marketplace, but there is a through line that remains consistent, which is quality storytellers, quality film, quality, and it can be just entertaining. It doesn't always have to be a message. It can just be entertaining. We the only things that we don't acquire are family films and animation. So I have really been able to learn about and get involved with so many different kinds of films, foreign language, documentary, narrative. And in my time there, in my 16 years there, we've acquired almost 800 films, and our library is almost 1,000 films. And I will say, almost every single one of them I have touched in some way. And so through that vast experience, I really have, I guess a great historical knowledge of the industry and film and.
Well, and I think what's interesting when you look at sort of the building blocks of your career to a point, right, to this point, is number one, it's bicoastal. So you've had experience in Los Angeles and an experience in New York. And I think it's always good not to be in your own vacuum and to understand how, business gets done. You've been on the agency side and the studio side. I mean, I've done something very similar, like we've done both sides. And you use different muscles when you're at the agency than you do at the studio, but they're complementary. And so now you start to have a very holistic view of things.
Yeah.
And
I call it my 360-degree view.
Right.
And it's so important.
And I think it is, I think it's incredibly important, but the other thing that I think you said, which I think also attributes to your success, is you've been a sponge and you've wanted to learn and you have learned and you've listened. And you haven't been afraid of innovation. I want to talk, before we talk about innovation and IFC, is like, I'd be curious, like over the early years of your career, were there certain filmmakers or films that you saw that you feel inspired you in a way that you said, like, that's the kind of thing, or this is the type of filmmaker or subject matter or moments that really, sort of hang true even today?
It's always the ones that got away.
Of course.
Well, that's not true. But I remember my memory.
The early days were very hands-on. It wasn't like you were texting and you were
No.
You were like writing out contracts together.
There was no cell phones, even in my, you went to Cannes and there wasn't cell phones. It's hard to remember what we did before it, honestly.
We were running up and down the Croisette like crazy.
You were like actually meeting people at, the corner of X and Y. And you carried these big Bibles around that we created.
That you printed. I still have them, right?
I have all of them, sadly. And then they became a thing where you made a cover and you had contact. I mean, it was fun, but now it's all on your phone. And it's
Right, it
digital.
was very competitive, these like catalogs, in essence, that you would put together, right? You'd go to a festival, you would have every film, every
Everything.
contact, like,
chronological,
you know, and people spent
alphabetical,
like
a month.
preparing
Yeah.
this whole thing, right? Like, because you could like have to find somebody, and how would you find them? And like, it was just, and then we bound them, and then we had three. I mean, we started with paper, and then we made it plastic, and it just became very fancy.
Yeah.
Now it's an app.
Yeah. It's an app. and I'm still, you know, not, I'm in a Rolodex world still. I still have trouble with the app. But yeah, no, I think that
Like in the Fine Line, New Line days, was there a project that stuck out to you that you thought was like a moment, and then you went to, you know, Weinstein?
I think I can tell you too. There was a movie that I remember. It was an acquisition screening of In the Company of Men, the Neil LaBute film, and I remember thinking it was such a hateful film, but it was such a powerful film, and I remember the way it made me feel, and I think that I always take that from watching a film and that experience of how did it make me feel and what do I do with that? And then I remember begging my bosses at Fine Line to Talk to Her. And it was the year, and they basically had engaged in Lord of the Rings at that time. And they just had no interest. And I think that was the moment I knew it was time to leave. Because I think that the notion of art house films at the time at that company, once they had engaged in Lord of the Rings, was sort of the end for me, and that's when I left and moved to New York to work at Miramax. But I think at the time in my 20s at Fine Line, I was just discovering who all these filmmakers were and what it meant. I never went to film school, so I never had any kind of formal
Education.
Training on like who these people are, or how do you analyze a film, or what is film criticism. So it really, to me, that era of living in Los Angeles and experiencing all of that, I know you always idealize things, you know, through a historical lens, but I really did love that time period because it was an absolute time period of discovery. And it's always a question. It's a crossroads. What do you do with that? You know, how do you move on with that? What do you take from that? And I think when I went to Miramax, I really learned more of a business side.
Yeah, you know, I was just looking. I had made this note from our days at New Line. I called it a dizzy feeling of discovery and the naivete of youth.
Mm-hmm.
Which was basically exactly like, you know, you felt like you were learning. And you could do why not, right? Like, you could try, why not?
But it was also a culture at the time when you had Mike DeLuca as the president, who was, you know, 28 years old when he took over. And it was sort of like, you know, how cool is that? And like, if he can do it, like, that's the example.
Right.
So, you know, it was also incredibly misogynistic.
Oh, yeah.
Laden with like lots of bad behavior and all of those things. But at the same time, you know,
it was the time though too.
Yeah, and I think if you had if you could understand where to put all those things and navigate it could for me it was a very kind of exciting time. But I also knew when that time was over.
It was over and ready. And then, ironically, you went to work for Harvey then.
So I kind of went from the frying pan to the fire, but I moved from LA to New York for this job. I also moved to New York in September of 2001, which was just the confluence of craziness at that time was very disorienting, even though it was like moving back home because my family is there. But the offices for Miramax were downtown in New York City, and they were closed for a while. So it was a very strange time because we were also owned by Disney, and our mail would have to get, you know, put through a microwave because it was the anthrax time. It was a very strange time to move there and work for Harvey. But, I came in as a senior vice president when I moved to New York for Miramax. And my experience there is probably very different than a lot of other people's experiences there because wasn't sort of raised in that environment. I had come to it at a senior executive level with very different perspective, different, so my relationship with Harvey was very different than I think other people's. But it was a toxic place, clearly, to work. And I think it was hard to see a lot of that until you were out of it. But I kind of...
Because the films were very good.
The films were great.
The films were like amazing.
But I had a lot of people when I was, I did acquisitions. My job was to convince people to let us buy their movies. And a lot of people didn't want, even with that kind of level of perception of this is the cool company, a lot of people were like, no, I don't want to deal with it. And so I found myself in a strange position of like, oh, okay, it's not always what it seems. But I think that was the 3 years I learned what not to do. And, it was a time when you get Harvey to say something like, you have to do this. And you kind of use your own judgment to say, do I do that? Or do I save my own, reputation and walk out with my head held high to,
Well,
not.
and I think you use an interesting word is like, you had judgment. And you had, and I say this, whether it's Harvey or any other business where there's bad behavior going on, I mean, you have to be responsible for yourself, too.
Yeah, you have to decide, and it doesn't apply only to the film industry. You have to decide how you're going to conduct yourself in any business, and I think that was the job for me where that became very clear, where I understood I had to make choices. Not happy with every choice I made,
Sure,
but I understood that was. And when my contract didn't get renewed, I actually didn't leave. They just didn't renew my contract, but they didn't renew a lot of people because of the Disney divorce, and I was really secretly relieved. But it was certainly an experience. I having worked at a lot of different sides of it, and I live very close to the office, and I remember I used to go home, I would cry almost every day when I would walk home. And it was just because of the toxicity. And I thought, God, this is just, when you've hit that bottom, it's like, that's not a way to work, especially when you come at it when you were so excited and passionate. And so when I was offered the job at IFC, it was really like this light coming from above, going like, here, what do you want to? It was almost like, what do you want to do?
Right.
And I had a boss who, kind of allowed that. I would say in Cannes, I love this movie so much, and he would say, okay, go buy it. Don't spend too much. And no one had ever given me that freedom. Mm-hmm. Like, no one had ever said those words to me. So I had to figure out, okay, what does that mean? What is not too much? How do I get this done? And I did. And then it was like off to the races.
And so when you would start that acquisition process where you had that control, it clearly was not only a creative decision, but it was also a business decision.
Yes.
Or like, did you have to do the, worksheets to figure out?
Yes. I mean, we're a small independent film company, so our margins are pretty tight and pretty small. So we did P&Ls for every film, but it was also like when you're buying a certain amount of films per year, and we'll talk about this, but we started the day and date model.
Right. Well, that I do. I mean, this is like, I think people don't realize this is 2006.
Yeah. Might have been 5, actually.
IFC was doing day and date, which, everyone thinks became a big deal during COVID, like for 20 years almost, or 15 years, right? So that model had existed. It just didn't feel sexy.
No. People said, you're killing cinema.
Right. And so it and applaud you because you were brave enough to say, look, this is what's going to give a business model that will work. This is what's going to probably allow more people to see your film than they will, even in the like our heyday of art house, right? And that you have to understand that.
Yeah. And to be clear, I didn't come up with it,
Well,
but I was the face of employing it and convincing filmmakers that this was a good thing. Day and date. So day and date is when you release a film theatrically and simultaneously on the same day you make it available digitally on VOD. And now day and date means it could mean multiple windows. It could be day and date with SVOD, which is subscription video on demand.
So you could be on Netflix and in the movie theater on the same day.
And what you're seeing now with all these studios who have Peacock and Paramount Plus and, you know,
Every plus.
Disney Plus, that they are experimenting with windows right now in releasing films theatrically, digitally, and on the Plus. So, you know, and we can talk more about that because we're doing that as well. We're experimenting on those windows, and so it's been a really interesting evolution. But at
Do
the time,
each of those windows offer a revenue stream?
yeah. The reason at the time in 2005-06 when we started it was the independent film world, it was hard. It was hard to make money. It was a difficult time, and we thought, how do you maximize 2 revenue streams with 1 P&A spend?
Right.
And so that's what you're
The
doing.
P&A being the marketing budget spend, right? So you were mitigating your risk for your P&A.
Yes, and there are things that come with that, like you couldn't play certain movie theaters because they wouldn't allow that window in their window. So there were pros and cons, and we tried to, you know, apply it to most films at the time. At the time, it was a bit of a volume play because we were trying to hold on to the real estate of the placement, and that was, you know, we got criticized for a lot of volume, but that was the reason why. We were trying to own the space. And that's why our library, to a certain extent, is sort of, you know, larger. Magnolia has been in business the same amount of time we have.
But they must have a fraction of the film.
Their library is about 500, and ours is double. So,
But wouldn't that be probably, and you feel like Sony Classics would probably be in the same?
probably they've been around longer.
They've been around longer,
Yeah.
but if you did, you know, year to year, your
they did
output
less
is
movie,
probably, yeah.
So I think it was it was a learning experience. So now I have, 18, 17 years of historical information on the evolution of day and date. I have all that financial information. So, I can understand the levels of what is it actually doing? What does that mean? But I will say in 2008, when the market crashed, we were one of the only companies really buying a lot of films. And that was a time when we were buying a lot of foreign language films and bringing a lot of foreign language films over to the US. And so it was a big explosion for us where we were really, I think even more than Sony Classics, buying a lot of foreign language film, which has obviously changed, even now.
Absolutely. And so now, we'll talk business, but I would be curious, out of these 16 years now at IFC, again, I always like to look at certain films that created, either the one that got away or created memorable moments that help inform sort of that creative. You guys don't produce anything, do you?
Well, ironically, IFC Films started as a production company. We produced Boys Don't Cry. We produced Monsoon Wedding, The Night Listener, some really amazing independent film. But we were selling them to other distribution companies. We had a program called Indigent, where we made,
Gosh,
we
I
were
remember that.
part of Indigent, and we made 16 films out of that, and you know, some really famous ones like Pieces of April and Tape with Ethan, and Tadpole, Gary Winnick's film. And those were some of those films ended up going D&D, but we were producing, and then I think they realized it was very risky, and so we morphed into a 100% acquisition model, and now we are morphing back into,
Are you?
Yeah, not necessarily producing as much as pre-buying,
Right.
and financing, because it's coming full circle. You know, things change. You can't stay the same. You have to evolve.
And again, going back to some of the films that you feel have been cornerstone acquisitions for you over time. I mean, you've had,
A lot.
a lot. Well, you've had a lot, and I think you've had like success from that first-time filmmaker to the seasoned filmmaker to the English language to the foreign language. But, you know, through all of us, right, we all have these moments where you saw something or something happened and you said, that I will always remember. Or, you know, I don't know, like when we did Dancer in the Dark in Cannes, and, you know, I'll never forget that first screening, or Crash. And
Actually, the thing about Dancer in the Dark, because I'm from the same town that Bruce Springsteen's from, and I will never forget in the green room at the New York Film Festival, Bjork sang Born to Run to Me a cappella in the green room. I was like, oh, that's a moment. Yeah, there's been quite a lot. I would say in 2007 in Cannes, I saw a film called 4 Months, 3 Weeks, 2 Days that when I talk about a film that makes you feel something, I couldn't, you know, you see something and you just can't speak after it. You are so stunned or moved, or it just affects you in some way. And that was that film for me. And I had to really figure out kind of why, what was it about? It was the filmmaking, it was the subject matter, I was just everything. And I like was shaking, and I was like, I have to buy this. And I did, and it won the Palme d'Or. And I remember, it was my first year at Fine Line, and I remember calling my boss and saying, it won the Palme d'Or, and I just started crying. And then I was like, this is like being able to, I didn't make the movie, you know, it's not my movie, but I could bring that movie to audiences in the U.S.
But I think that's, look, I think that's the gift. I mean, I think for me, that's always been, I'm not the creative. I know what to do with the creative, and you know, you want to get close to that fire, right? I can't start the fire, but I want to be close because it's so special. And you feel so lucky. But you knew how to give, I mean, no one would see these films without your passion.
But a lot of people, you know, there was an audience full of people seeing it, but there were a lot of people who were like, oh, I could never buy that, or I could never release that, or I could never do it, or I can, you know. And then the other film, I think it was the next year, I don't think it was that year, but was a film called Hunger, directed by Steve McQueen. It was Steve McQueen's first movie, and it starred Michael Fassbender. And I just remember you know, I remember at the airport, to backtrack, on 4 Months, 3 Weeks, 2 Days, and we bought the movie and it was announced, and I was in the airport with another acquisition executive from another company, and he's like, oh, you bought the abortion movie. I was like, oh, if that's how it's gonna go, okay, I see how this is gonna go. And when I bought Hunger, another acquisition said, oh, you bought the movie where they smear shit on the walls. And I was like, you know, it's really a reductive way to look at these things. But I think that there are people in our industry who can be very cynical. And, you know, I know that everything that we acquire and release is not going to be beloved by everybody. In fact, I don't want it to be.
Right.
Because there's a reason why we bought a lot of Lars von Trier movies. You know, I personally am not a fan, but I love the conversation that it can bring.
Right, and I think that it's so much better whether you love it or you hate it, that it's better than having no feeling about it.
Yeah, and something like Hunger, I mean, it's astonishing filmmaking. Just, it's hard to watch, and I find myself, and all the movies that I'm probably going to mention are like super uber depressing, but amazingly shot and composed, and in their kind of, you know, and I think part of it is I wanted to be a photographer, and I think there's
So this
always
visual is very,
piece of a visual that I really love. And so, yeah, things like, you know, and those kinds of films. There was a film, you know, there's probably about 5 films in my career that I've actually cried over not getting.
and those are?
Blue Valentine was one of them. The Rider, Chloe Zhao's film, was another one. We had a handshake deal on it, and then I woke up in the morning and it
Wasn't a handshake
wasn't a
anymore,
handshake deal
right?
anymore. But yeah, and I think like, oh, what is it? The through line on those? Those are really up and coming filmmakers who, you know, it's their first or second film, but you see the raw talent and what they can do. And not everybody, you know, you have to believe in it. You know, there's a reason why some distributors buy some movies and some buy others, and it's really, you just have to believe in what you're seeing and that you are the right person to get it out there. And there are movies that I've loved that we have passed on because I'm just, you know,
Not
I don't
there,
know.
right.
And I would say one of the movies that obviously we're so proud of as a company is Boyhood. And I remember, and I had nothing to do with that movie to the extent of I did not greenlight it. It was a 12-year project. But when I joined the company, I remember, because I was head of production, I would get this like check sign off. I was like, what is this? Every year I'd get like a little amount of money that I had to
Right.
authorize to go to Rick Linklater. And I was like, finally I was like, what is this and what are we doing? And then I would get some footage on a DVD, and it was really random footage every year. And then I remember when I saw the rough cut of it, I just walked out and I thought, this is a masterpiece. And one of the only other films that I saw in a rough cut that I was the exec on at Miramax was City of God.
Oh.
That I walked out. It was like a 3-hour cut. I mean, obviously Boyhood was like a 3-hour cut. And those are the 2 movies that come to immediate mind that I walked out of both and was like, oh, these are just masterpieces in filmmaking. And, you know, obviously Boyhood went on to
Well, and
have
I
much
think,
success.
look, I think all these films that you have mentioned are iconic now in sort of the archives and have proven themselves. Also to have longevity. I mean, my guess is I haven't seen Boyhood in a long time, but probably if I went back and watched it again,
I think it stands up.
I think it would probably stand up really well.
Yeah.
And I think that is also something to be said. There are 2 other things I want to ask you before we open to questions, but one is on the business side now, because I think this is what we're all, I talk to a lot of box office people, and I talk to a lot of people doing analysis of streaming, which is just enormously confusing and very difficult, 971,000 minutes versus, 120 million hours versus, something else. Amazon was doing minutes. And I just don't know, I'm like, what is that, a penny a minute? Or what is that actually equal? How are from your business model? And that's where I go back to these windows and are there revenue streams? Because if you go to Netflix or Amazon or one of these, right, it's all just one thing. It's not, then your international happens and then your home entertainment happens and it's everything all at once. Now it's 220 million global subscribers, and that is just staggering. And you see the little things light up on your app that says you're #1 in 93 countries, which is pretty amazing. But I don't know what it ultimately means financially.
Yeah. Good question. I mean,
As being on the production side, like what does this mean as a producer financially?
so I've been in this business in different capacities for 30 years. If I started a little more than 30 years. And so, every 5 years we go through different cycles. And every 5 years companies come and go. In their 5-year plans, they're not making it, they move on, they get consolidated. So I think that you have to kind of look at it with a frame of mind of like, okay, we're going to ride this out. And how are, going day and date for us was a way to change and write it out. You have to change, and you have to be able to change and have that flexibility to evolve, because revenue streams are drying up, they're accelerating, and you have to kind of anticipate that and know, how are, when I acquire a film, sometimes it doesn't get released for a year. The whole market changes in a year. So you have to really understand sort of, okay, when I acquire this, what's my risk and what's my bonus here. So I think that what it means is you have to be strategic, but you can't put it all through the same model. You have to really look at each film's DNA and say, what's right for this film? But it's all a risk. It's all a guess. We're all just making the best educated guess that we can on how these things are going. And, look, there is no DVD. We don't even put DVD in our P&Ls anymore. DVD used to be the biggest.
It used to be, would be the saving grace.
Would be the saving grace. Cable VOD, meaning VOD that you buy on your TV system through Comcast or Time Warner or Spectrum, dead, except for certain film, like certain particular genres, like action,
Right.
and or like a Nick Cage movie or something like that. And now iTunes and Amazon, that rental business, static. That was like meteoric. Now it's static.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the new platform? Where are we making this up? And it's, SVOD and AVOD.
Which I think,
And then when that's done, it'll change back to something else. So honestly, if you stress about these things and you say it's over, we can't release movies anymore, then what are you doing in this job, right?
well, but I think that is an incredibly crucial point to creatives, to producers and directors and to writers, that this opinion of this is where I anticipate seeing my film, right? This is where I expect my film to be. You have to sort of let go of that grip a bit, because the world changes and it changes a year later. It takes 2 years to get a film, from start to finish, let's say, right? At a minimum, right on a good day. And so you have to let that evolution happen. I mean, the people I work for, they always talk about, and they make very big movies, and they're always like, we're platform agnostic.
Yeah.
Whether I see it in a movie theater, which is where I personally enjoy it, but whether I see it in streaming and I can hit 220 million people around the world that would never have an opportunity otherwise, I'll do that.
I mean, one of the early proponents of platform agnostic releases was Steven Soderbergh, and I can't tell you how
Who
much.
discovered My Guys.
Yeah. So, but I can't tell you how meaningful that perspective from somebody like him was, because I think that filmmakers like that who really understood that it was about reaching their audiences, and a lot of them would say, well, I don't care how I reach it, but obviously some films are made to be seen on the big screen. Some films, it doesn't matter necessarily. Some, you get nuances seeing it on a big screen sometimes that you don't on a small screen. But I do think that I think people have to be open. They have to be open to and collaborative. And I didn't make the movie. I am a facilitator, and I am a partner. And so, if a filmmaker comes to me and says, my dream is to have it on 100 screens and theatrically, we kind of assess, okay, what does that mean? And can we do that? And maybe it's not right. And then we have a conversation. But, I do see, because of everything that's happening and because of COVID and because our culture changed fundamentally from COVID, that I do believe that a smaller base, community-oriented theatrical experience will bounce back in strength. And I'm betting on that.
Well, that is the other thing I want to talk about, your theater.
Yes.
Well, you have to talk about it. You should. So Ariana's like leading the charge, I would say, to bring back a local theater.
So in COVID, I moved to a small beach town in New Jersey, and the local movie theater, which was a 100-year-old theater, originally a vaudeville theater. Jack Nicholson grew up there. He was an usher there when he was a teenager. And Danny DeVito used to go there, and it closed and not to reopen, and a church made an offer on it, and I just thought, it has to stay a theater. It's right on Main Street. It just wouldn't have been a good business for the town. People loved going to a movie and dinner, and it's a walkable street, and so I made the mistake of calling the mayor and thinking, oh, I work in the film business. Like, how can I help? And he's like, oh. And then he put it all on my plate. And so, it took a long time around to figure out, how to make it a scenario. And I found a group of partners who came on board. We're still raising money for a renovation, but we got a liquor license, and we're going to make it like a nice screening room environment. And I think that's the future of cinema. Having a glass of wine, going out with your friends, and it's a small theater, and it's not, it's a nice theater. It's comfortable, but you're excited to go. It's not sticky floors. It's not bare box walls off the New Jersey Turnpike. It's cozy, and that I think. Cinema is a social experience that will never, ever go away.
I totally agree.
Ever. And I think it's our responsibility, all of our responsibilities, to figure out how to make that happen. And there are a lot of people all over the country who are really working towards that. And we've met so many of them. We're not alone. And so many amazing art houses closed in the last 3 years. And so there's a lot of people, and I feel like, we have to kind of figure out how to band together more and help each other. But I have so much faith that it's going to succeed.
I mean, I do too. And I also think that, as you said, it's a community experience. And I think the interesting thing that we have seen over the theatrical business over the last year is, look, I think the success of whether it's independent or mass-oriented films, is like 10 to 15% succeed maybe, and then you have a group that just kind of breaks even, and then, you have the losing proposition, but maybe it's for other reasons. We still see lightning in a bottle. Mm-hmm. I think everywhere, everything, all at once at this point is like the indie lightning in the bottle of this year.
But you never know where that lightning in a bottle.
But that's what I was going to say. We were talking about this earlier. There is no way you would ever read the description of that film and say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to bet on that." There's just no way. It just happens, right? And then you can look at something like Top Gun, which is a 30-year, difference. And look, they delivered a great movie. They waited. And it got people excited. I was interested to see that Avatar re-release did $30 million.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember reading an article on Top Gun before it came out, and Top Gun was released when I was in high school, and I mean, or college, whenever it was released, and I mean, it was, everybody saw that movie. We were all on the motorcycle. We were all Kelly McGillis. It was all a thing, but But I remember reading an article and that said, well, are people gonna? It's this generation. They don't know Top Gun. They didn't feel that, and it was like really a downer. Like it's not gonna succeed. It's not gonna do well. And I was like, are you out of your mind? It's a story that 30 years later, it still resonates in an exciting, entertaining way. You put hot guys in airplanes and and going fast. I mean, are people out of their minds? Like, it's like where are we on Fast and Furious? 20? I don't know. It's sort of,
but
there's a reason why those work.
Well, and we're going to open it up to questions, but the one interesting point that I think also is, and I think you guys see it in Ariana, is, the sense of optimism, right? Of course, entertainment to me is always about optimism. And I think where we get a lot of cynicism is from certain, maybe studio people. I think we get it from the press a lot.
Mm-hmm. I have sometimes a real issue with the press because, we all hang on their every word sometimes. And I think that they need to take more responsibility in what they're writing about and how they're talking about film and how they're supporting independent film and not, I think it's feast or famine, and there's no middle ground anymore. It's independence, and it's, Marvel and DC, and then it's the streamers. And, I think that there needs to be a more nuanced conversation with the press. And there's, it used to be a healthy level of cynicism. I don't quite think it's a healthy level anymore. I think it's too much. And so I think that, we are a community. And we all need to be responsible. And we should ask questions. We should challenge. We should push the boundaries. We should do things that are out of the box, because that's the only way to elicit change. Mm-hmm. That's it. But I think that, if we do that and we support each other, there a lot of really amazing things can happen. I try to be optimistic, because if I'm not optimistic, and there's a lot of cattiness in our business, and I don't appreciate it, because sure, I love the good joke, but you really have to kind of support these struggling filmmakers. They're our future. Who is our future? What is our future? We need to keep that storytelling culture alive. And we are the guardians of that. So, while I do, bigger films or established filmmakers, I really try to always have a few first-time filmmakers. We've probably released more films by women than
Well, we
any
did
other.
Relic with you, and that was, first-time filmmaker, really successful.
Yeah. And she's incredibly talented.
And she's incredibly talented.
And I think that it's, things don't change until leadership changes. And I think it's a really important responsibility, and I don't take it lightly.
Well, I think that's the perfect note to open to questions, if anyone has. Janet?
I have 10 million questions. It's such an interesting conversation. So this may be a tiny bit in the weeds, but I think it's a micro to get to the macro, and there may be other people in this room who are independent filmmakers and producers. So in order to compel funding, right, you have to show your investors, if they're going to put money in, there's a way to get money out. And it used to be back in the day when we all came up that there was this enormous revenue stream that was going to come from DVDs and that's why it was an exciting time for all of us, because we did have money to play with and risk could get taken and a whole generations of filmmakers could come up. So now that the revenue streams are shrinking, you get more eyeballs on a film with less revenue coming in for each eyeball, right? So what would be a fair expectation for an independent film team that's made a film for about $1 million going to the market to think, just a genuine independent film, no stars, character-driven, to think that they might be able to get upfront as a deal, just a general hypothetical. And if you're approaching investors, what could you point to as ways to get their revenue back?
That is a great question. And when we started doing Day and Date in 2006 or whenever it was probably the question. So, because we didn't release any of the numbers publicly. Part of the reason we weren't really releasing the numbers publicly was because we were also, and still to this day, don't want to diminish the importance of exhibition. And exhibition wasn't happy with films going Day and Date. So we kept getting a lot of like, release the numbers, what are the numbers doing? I'm like, okay, I'll tell you the numbers. Do you know you're not gonna know what they mean. You're not gonna know the context of what those numbers are because you don't know how much we spent. You don't know what the splits are, what the revenue is. So it's a complicated puzzle, and for us, we are incredibly transparent with the filmmakers we work with. They get every number. They get an explanation of what those numbers mean. So they can take that to their financiers and say, here's an example of, what a film, like what the last film did. They also can ask for estimates from us because it is a puzzle when you're putting it together. What is international worth? You have studios really are kind of predominantly taking international rights right now. Like you have Universal, Sony, Paramount. They're really the main players unless you're really going art house. Again, it's no middle ground. It's studios or the smaller independent players internationally. So what does that look like? Do you have a studio deal internationally? Do you have independence? And if you have a studio deal, sometimes they make you go a certain screen count theatrically, which requires a certain P&A spend. So it's not, I don't want to get too much into the weeds because it's not an answer that I can answer easily, except to say no movie is the same, even if it has the same DNA. And so, because everything kind of has a different track. Did it play Sundance? Did it not play Sundance? So that's why we really do look at everything individually. But if we want to buy something and the filmmaker comes to us and says, well, I have financiers and they want to know how they're going to get their money back, we'll walk them through what we think. It might not always happen, but we'll walk them through what we think.
Just out of curiosity,
Based on all of that information.
where do awards fit in all of this now? Given sort of the release patterns that we have, and we don't have that window sort of that gives you the bounce if you got a nomination, and
Well, that's the thing. Where are awards right now? Because in a while ago, I won't say the old days, but in a while ago, you would get a bounce from
right, we
awards.
would create a formula, and you would say,
And when I say a bounce, you would get revenue. Like it would be, you would make your money back and the money that you spent to promote the awards. That is not the case anymore. So we are purely doing awards for career, for the filmmaker, for the actress, but we're not getting our monies back and so I personally think, and I'm a little cynical about this, that we need to revamp what that looks like and how we're spending. And it needs to be equitable because we have an amazing film called Corsage that is, Vicky Krieps could be up for, maybe she could make it into Best Actress. It's the Austrian entry. It could definitely be
it's amazing.
It is amazing, and it could be in the foreign language thing. But we can't compete with Netflix. We can't compete with on the money that they spend. So how is that fair? And it's always, we all want great performances to be rewarded, and I think they should be. And I think that there is a place for it, but the amount of money that it requires is just, it's cuckoo. Did you say cuckoo? It's cuckoo.
No, I think that it is, and I think
It's wasteful.
it is.
It's
And from
wasteful.
the place where we came from in the early days, I will always remember these conversations, like with Rolf or somebody, about what the budget for our awards looked like, and he's like, "What would the point of that be?
And then I have to.
We're gonna lose money."
and then if I say that to a filmmaker, they'll be like, well, you don't support my movie, or
Right.
you don't believe in it. It's like, it's not that I don't believe in it. It's we don't get any of it back.
So if you had, so let me ask you a question, like if you,
and if we get it back, you get it back.
right, but so let's say you had then the next film, like would it change if you had their next film?
Potentially, I'm not
Right, 'cause
saying
that
there's
would
no
mitigate-
value in it.
No, I understand that.
I wish it just were a better system. I wish it were more, merit based than how much you spend. And there's some amazing campaigns. I think Coda, if you really think about it, was an amazing campaign because they were not the pick in the beginning of the process, and then they kind of became.
Because they were also
Because
a
they
feel-good movie.
Yeah. But they also, they really kind of smartly, the way they spent into, the way they kind of fell into a niche.
Yeah, they also bought the film for $25 million.
Yeah. But let me tell you, that actually, my understanding, and I don't work at Apple, I don't know, but that the film didn't track prior to the awards. So maybe on a streamer,
Maybe
for
it
them,
then-
it's
right.
different. That when they bought it for $25 million, they put it on Apple. It did not do well, and then when it won the Oscar, it did kind of have a bump. But
Just for clarification, as a follow-up question, to make sure I understood, you're saying that if you do an awards campaign and you get an award, you don't see the money back, it doesn't draw audience to you, and yet with Coda, it did. So
Well,
this
it didn't
sort of-
necessarily draw, but it
It drew
didn't do
viewers.
well on Apple.
it didn't bring new subscribers necessarily.
Right,
It just
Apple
was
needs
like
subscribers.
attention.
Right.
It was
But-
like
but
it was watched more.
It was
But
watched more, but
the streamers don't make money unless they get new subscribers.
again, that's a little surprising, a little counterintuitive, because you think that there are some percentage of those viewers that are going to be new because they're compelled to Apple.
Yeah, but new viewership, there's a difference between new
So,
subscribers.
but I'm sorry, that's what I mean. That of the increased viewership, some percentage of that has to be new subscribers that subscribed.
Can
Well, I'm
you
sure that
even
they can
tell?
break it down.
Oh
But-
yeah, you can tell, but I don't know because I don't.
Right.
This is anecdotal, so I don't have the actual information.
But for your business, which it would seem, with the smaller titles that are about prestige and conversation, that an award campaign, even or an award, would increase the conversation and increase the attention and the attendance. But you're saying it doesn't really?
I'm saying as a value proposition, not really. Things have changed. It used to be, I think, that your home video you'd be able to sell a lot
And
more.
your
home video,
international
and your
would usually
international
come
and all that.
after.
I just think that it's a bit of a blip now. Yeah. Yes. Yeah,
a
and it's
flat.
not like you're not selling more units. I mean, the hope is, so our parent company is AMC Networks, which is a television company, and they've been really supportive. And in the past year, they started AMC Plus because, like every linear television company, the way that you're going to get people and subscribers to keep them is to move away from linear and into a subscription model. And as a part of that, we've always been very separate from them. And this year they said, "Oh, wait a minute, we have a movie division. We should have a pay one deal with you." So our pay one deal moved to AMC Plus. But because they're pretty nascent in their ability to attract new subscribers, and they're building, we have a pay two deal with Hulu. And it's very short windows, and a lot of companies are doing that too. So the idea being is that we can cycle the film around, but they're set fees. So it's not, your hope is that maybe on digital, if it gets, maybe as a branding exercise, if we win the best foreign language film for Corsage, that it'll help my parent company, to say we have an Oscar-winning film. But I don't know. That remains to be seen if it brings in new subscribers, or it just makes the people who already subscribe happy that they get to watch it? Yeah. But that's like a loss leader to kind of keep the brand. It's a branding exercise, really.
You ladies have successfully navigated so many things in the last 2 decades. How do you beat big tech? That's who your competitor is. Netflix is a tech company. Apple's a tech company. Google, they're all in there. They have unlimited budgets. How do you beat them?
Well, you don't beat them, and you don't have that mentality that you are going out to beat them, because what they don't do, and they never will do, is curate. And I think, we curate. We try to create an audience base that comes to us because they know that an IFC film is going to be something that they'll like. I don't go on Netflix thinking, oh, a Netflix film is going to be something I like. I go to Netflix when I want to veg out. Or somebody, word of mouth, says there's this great show on Netflix and you have to watch it. So I think there is room to differentiate. I don't want to beat them. I don't want to be them. And I think there are a lot of people who want to go with us. I think one of the reasons why I'm very optimistic about, and I don't want to be a Pollyanna either here, but because there are a lot of challenges, but I am optimistic on something like AMC Plus. There's nothing else like it. It's really the new HBO. HBO got absorbed into a huge company now, and there's nothing else really like it. So I look at our parent company as smart entertainment for adults, and I think that there's a huge market for that. And I think, we're gonna, on that level, on a television side, they're hitting that audience. And for me, my responsibility on the film side is to make sure that films I'm acquiring not only work for us, branding and for IFC Films, and that make money, because we are a standalone film distribution company, and that's our primary goal. And the other thing is, in terms of who you are and what your identities are in this business, don't ever lose sight of it, because the minute you start losing sight of who you are, then that's when you start to, buy things that you don't know how to release.
Right, you
or,
can't be everything to everyone, right? You have to, as you would say, pick your lane.
Yeah.
You know.
So I quite enjoy being the antithesis of the tech companies.
And I think those tech companies, by the way, can be very collaborative. I think the hardest thing in working with some of them is their internal structures are very different than our internal structures, which tend to be very integrated and holistic. And the internal structures at tech companies I have found to be much more bifurcated. And so they don't layer up. They kind of lay flat. And
Well, it's not their primary business.
Right. And so as a result, I think that's the challenge, is to collaborate with the departments. So I think that's the hard part. So go ahead.
Hi. I'm Michael Kovnat. I met you back in the days, in those early days in New York. And congratulations on the award.
Thank
tonight.
you.
That's very exciting. Just something I don't understand about the acquisitions process, just because I've never been on that side of it, and slightly self-interested. I have a documentary showing here this weekend, but I don't understand do you guys, how much is it kind of a person's passion, like you seeing this film and just responding to it, and how much is your team? I mean, you must have disagreements internally, where some people feel it and some people don't. So I'm just curious about how that process works internally, how much debate there is, and then how it gets resolved in the end. Is it one person's passion overrides everything else?
It's a good question. We have a team of people who are looking at films, and then we also have a marketing team, a PR team, and everybody has an opinion, whether you like it or not. But I try to empower people to fight for their opinion, because otherwise, if you don't have somebody fighting it on your side, then you can be acquiring it for the wrong reasons. We have acquired many, many films that I personally don't like, but I think they're good business and they're good buys. So we debate every single one of them. We talk about all of them. We have a slate for the year. You're constantly, you know, we came out of Toronto Film Festival 2 weeks ago, made a lot of offers, didn't know where the chips were going to fall, and so kind of have to navigate, okay, what does that look like? And I think that it's always constant discussion, but that's what I love, you know, hearing different points of view. We have different ages, different genders, different, you know, perspectives on the team, and that kind of leads me into, you know, we need to be a more inclusive business, and we, you know, need to not only check a box, but like walk the talk and listen to people and put that listening into action. And so no matter who you are, and that's what we try to do. At the end of the day, it's my decision. So sometimes I overrule, and sometimes I, you know, I'm like, okay, you like this, it makes sense financially, let's give it a shot. Like there's a documentary that we acquired called Bad Axe, which we acquired out of Tribeca Film Festival. Super small, first-time filmmaker. It's like an absolute tearjerker, and it's been winning film festivals. It's just got like shortlisted and kind of a lot like on the Gold Derby list. And I was like, you know what? It's not gonna win, but the fact that it's just getting that attention because my junior fought for it and we made a good deal for everybody on it, was like, that's great, because I don't know, you know, we're giving it a chance. And that's the hope.
Yeah.
I wanted to try and more on these kind of features things. So this gentleman moved over into the documentary. My stuff is advocacy, is what I call it. But I'm interested in the aftermarket. Now it seems to me everything is festivals, and there's tiny little audiences. How many people are even in when the films are successful at the festival? And so I'm interested in the real aftermarket, which is, to me, documentaries as curriculum. They're there in the billions, right? Students, that's not going away. And incredible. And a film or a video will kill somebody standing in the front of the room talking for transfer of information, and in 5 minutes or whatever, no contest. And you can do it at home, etc. So, documentary, the day after the festival, they made the round. Yeah, they're not going in the theaters, that's for sure. Right? So it seemed to me this is like, wow, happening. And COVID has potentiated video to an extraordinary degree. I was, you know, a prophet, but whatever. Now, it's routine, right? Everybody. Well, that's, anyway, so I'm interested in that. Whether, you know, and that's where I think things are going. And also this kind of small group interaction, the screening experience. You know, going to a cinema, you don't have a social experience. You're alone with your mate. And whereas my thing, I do these interactive screens. I call them video salons. And we're deliberately making little small groups. Yeah, maybe 100 people. Had 25 small groups, and they talk to each other about what did you just see and what happened. And also we could do maybe social mobilizations around those small groups that make community active groups using video. Same thing, documentaries and everything's online in these little 3 minutes. Anyway, it's a whole complex.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. There are companies now who specialize in that, and it's hard for us to specialize so much in that because it is a good business, and there are companies who do it better than we do. So we sub to them, and we work with them on, you know, creating curriculums, or whether it's a curriculum or whether it's, you know, some like a package that can go out. A lot of different things on the educational space, but I think what you're talking about is curation, really, and I think that is for me the key in the future of having a group, a smaller, and a level of engagement with an audience. And I think where exhibitors have stumbled is really not being able to connect with their audiences. You know, why are theaters not doing so well? There's many reasons why theaters aren't doing well, but one of it is they've lost a connection with their audience. And I think they're understanding that and doing things to try to change that.
I totally agree. We have time for one more question if we have. Go ahead, Karen.
I love that you're talking about community theaters, and I feel very strongly about it too. That there's this that connection is there, and that these theaters become very important places for communities to congregate, which in a larger sense, it becomes the film festival too, as well. But I'm wondering, the multiplex theaters that have existed for, the last several decades, that were kind of the places where I think the disconnect happens a lot. What's happening to those? Are they going to survive? Have they survived? Or a lot of them, I never go to them, so I don't really have a feeling of what kind of.
I think it depends where, and what the competition is in market. But I think that I personally think they're a dying breed, to the extent that they're just not a pleasant, big box 16 plexes are not pleasant, but they're also, I'll say two things. They're all showing like Spider-Man on
10 screens, 10
or whatever.
screens,
So
right.
it's not. However, because of that, we have actually started to get some of our films into those where we never did before. So, it's more and more that you'll start to see art house movies on the 10th and 11th screen of an AMC or a Regal, but I think as an experience, they're waning.
I think the exhibition community in this large multiplex also has a problem that they own real estate, right? And the amount that their real estate costs, combined with an empty theater and lack of concessions, is just from a business model. I think, if these streamers actually turn into doing 45-day windows, it may change, but the theatrical business has been going down
Even before.
way before COVID.
Yeah.
It has to be a little reimagined.
Yeah.
And in the same way Ariana, I think, said, like every 5 years, right, or 10 years, we have to rethink things. I think we're at that moment of rethinking things because you have competition, and so you have an audience that's able to be a little more discerning. And so that then goes back to the curation, because, I think on average, most people subscribe between 5 and 8. They have 5 to 8 subscriptions. That could be your Amazon Prime, that could be your Netflix, that could be, your AMC, whatever you want it to be. But if you're having 5 to 8 subscriptions and you add the theatrical model to it, it's a lot of competition for your, the cost. And again, like I still think, and I look at Avatar, re-released and does $30 million, people do want that experience.
It's funny, we have a theater in New York City, IFC Center, and one of the most successful things that have been there is the Wong Kar-wai retrospective. And I think it's interesting that I think what I see in that, and the Avatar, is younger audiences discovering this and wanting a theatrical experience. The younger audiences are going to the movie.
And the IMAX seems to be finding a little bit of an audience, because that is a very specific experience.
And it's, I think for us, I'm encouraged that younger audiences and, want to go to the films. It's new for them. It's, I have teenage nieces who in COVID didn't go, we took them to see movies in the movie theater, but it's it's special. And that's how I felt when I was a kid. So I kind of feel like, if we can encourage that feeling and we can encourage that environment and really have films in theaters that people want to see, then I think, it will come back. I am optimistic about it.
Yes.
Adding the live event before, talkbacks with filmmakers, conversations, panels, bringing in gourmet food and drink. I think these are all trends that are really
They make it a
encouraging.
full experience.
Yeah, exactly. And it-
Yeah, and it's when I say exhibitors are finally waking up to the fact that they have to kind of, you know,
Cater.
engage and not make it such a sterile experience, then I think that they're doing the right things.
On that note, oh, sorry. Janet, go ahead.
This is the third of my 110 questions. So I'm wondering if you, it makes a lot of sense that young audiences that are craving for social experience that they were deprived of over these 3 years are looking for communal gathering. So I'm wondering if you're thinking that the growing and more dedicated audience for theatrical experience indie films is going to be younger, where for a while it was the boomers who were habituated to doing it. And are you leaning in that direction when you're looking at acquisitions?
Well, not so much, because they're also a very expensive audience to get to, the younger audience, because they're competing with so many different things. And so I think, yes, but we're being very careful and sort of making sure that what we acquire, we feel confident that we can release it properly. I don't think the older art house audience has gone away. I just think there hasn't really been much for them in the theaters. So I think that, you know, we might see a little bit of a resurgence of films that cater more towards an older art house audience.
Thank you. This was
Thank
so
you.
great.